Hi, Bonnie here once again with my notes because these chapters are so dense and there's so much to talk about. This is the eighth chapter of A Hunter Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century. And we're talking about love and parenthood and relationships is the theme of this chapter. And so it flows from the previous chapter, sex and gender, quite nicely, and they kind of refer back and forth. And so I've just highlighted a couple things that I found pretty interesting in the chapter. And so they start talking about calling back to the previous chapter about how the evolution of the egg is pretty vital. And they specify the transition between having an egg that you lay and either abandon or take care of, depending on what animal you are, into live births and what that leads into in terms of parental care. And so you can imagine there's egg layers out there, salmon, for example, fish, they lay eggs and then they go and die. So they are not there to take over the care of the kids, as well as like octopus and various invertebrates. And then you have species like birds where you see the egg laying, but then you also see the invested care of the parents. And you also see more monogamy in birds. There's a few species of birds, they highlight them, that are not monogamous. Cuckoo birds, for example, they're like brood parasites and they trick other birds into taking care of their kids for them, which is really interesting. And there's some really cool ecology in that whole relationship that's not part of this book. But I thought it was really cool. And then in mammals, you see that the more helpless the babies are, the more time the parents need to be invested in the care of the infant. And so what I mean by that is a horse, for example, is born and can almost instantly walk and, run around and sort of be a horse, meaning that it has evolved to come pre-programmed with what it means to be a horse. And there's still some social learning, like where they are in the herd, their sort of social hierarchy of wild horse herds. But for the most part, a horse is born and it looks like a horse and it behaves like a horse. Whereas with other animals, people, for example, we are very helpless at birth. We come with some pre-programming, but man oh man, do we require a lot of care in order to learn what it means to be human. And there's a special word for this, and I wrote it down. Oh, and I can't read my own writing. Altrichiality. I probably should have practiced that before I actually said it out loud for you. Maybe I could spell it. Anyway, there's a special word for it. And what that is the sort of the helplessness, sort of a scale of the helplessness of the infant. And the significance of that, oh, sorry, Ophelia is growling at me. Pause. We're back. So the significance of that is that there is a lot of programming that can happen after you're born. That has evolved with our brain development. If we needed to come with all of the programming, our heads would be so big that our moms couldn't actually give birth to us. But that allows culture to influence us. Oh, now the cat is bothering me. Sorry, pause. Which in itself, the helplessness is not like a superpower, right? It's quite detrimental in that it involves a lot of care and investment involved from the parents and a lot of like safety monitoring, right? So if you've been around babies or infants or toddlers where I'm at right now, there's a lot of safety management as they explore risks, which is very fun and also can be a little bit terrifying. And so why would this be a superpower or an advantage? And it's because we're so moldable. We can become anything. We're such an adaptive, like niche jumping species. We've somehow managed to both specialize and be generalists and like conquer the world. And part of that is because of this ability to learn that we have evolved to have, which has happened because of this maternal care. So, first thing that happened was the egg, and then we had to live birth in this maternal care. And the second thing that they talk about that is sort of vital to this development of love and relationships is the nurturing, the nurturing nutritional component of mammals. So we are milk producing, we lactate, and we nourish our young through that lactation process, which guarantees time spent with mom. Right? That's like a one-on-one, here we are, and that allows the evolution of the hormones that are released during breastfeeding, like oxytocin, which is the love and bonding hormone. And so they argue that a mother's love is sort of the foundational example of love. It's like the first one that has evolved, and it's because of the care that is being put into the mammals, mom, and infant. I thought that was a really interesting way to look at sort of a sophisticated and complex complex thing like love. And then they talk about how, because we've now established this kind of love between the mom and the infant, how does that influence the other relationships? And so then they talk about pair bonding as well as siblings and the different mating styles that you can have. So they touch on, things like monogamy, which is one-on-one and then mating together for life is what they mean by monogamy. So not like what humans can sometimes do, where they are sort of serially monogamous, and so they are with one person and then get a divorce, and then they're with only one person again, but it's a different person. That's not technically monogamy. That's more a form of polygyny, because the way that they define it is when the male is dominating the sexual reproduction of more than one female is essentially their definition. And so they make what I really liked about it, we could go into the different kinds of polygamy and their implications, but what I thought was really, really interesting was what happens to society when monogamy is at its highest. What are the conditions that change that? And then what are the implications of that? And how does that lead to violence? Which I thought was really, really interesting. So if you think about animals that are polygamous, where the male has multiple female partners, there is a lot of violence involved in maintaining that relationship. So like prides of lions, or anytime there's an animal that, I think elephant seal was the other one that they talked about, but now that might have been for something else. Lions for sure. Or things like deer and elk, where there's quite biological differences between the male and the female. Like the males have the really big horns, right? That's because they need to fight off to earn for and protect for the reproduction of the female. And when we don't have to fight for resources as much, monogamy kind of goes up because of how, I'm going to get this. It's advantageous for the female to invest in monogamy because there is paternal care that comes along with that. There's invested interest from the male to help the female take care of the young, which makes it easier for the female, is essentially what it boils down to. And so it's a more advantageous strategy for females across species when they have to have this high level of care for their infants to solicit and create monogamous relationships. And so I'm going to read this straight from the book because I found this really interesting about the violence component. So, mating systems shift as ecological conditions change. When resources are in surplus, so there's a lot of resources for us, monogamy is likely favored. It provides a clear advantage at the lineage population level by bringing all able adults into child rearing, allowing the population to capture resources at the fastest rates. So everyone is participating, it takes a village, and we're all thriving. When a population reaches carrying capacity, so we've sort of maxed out the resources that we can have, and zero-sum dynamics are once again in play, the incentives of high-ranking men tend to shift in the direction of polygyny. Male-male competition becomes the driving force as men with wealth and power seek to dominate the reproductive output of multiple women. Oh, pause. And back. So, the driving force of the reproductive force of multiple women. In weird countries, remember that acronym about weird, wealthy, educated, industrious, developed, I forget what R is. Oh, rich. In weird countries, this pattern can be obscured because when a man leaves his family to have a new one with a second, usually younger woman, we call him serially monogamous. But in reality, this is clearly a form of polygyny. So when the male has more than one female. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. When polygyny is on the rise in a society, we see an increase in sexually frustrated young men who are willing to take big risks for the possibility of gaining a mate. The lineages of the relatively few powerful males who benefit from polygyny and also benefit from arming frustrated young men and sending them abroad with dreams of coming back with a bride or as a marriageable war hero. The possibility of gaining territory and treasure through military adventurism has clear evolutionary implications. It expands the resources available to the conquering population and thereby increases its size. Such military adventurism is also a transfer of resource, frontier, which, as we discuss in the final chapter, is a form of theft. So it's really interesting to hear about that evolutionary perspective of how mating has shifted in humans. So I live currently in Canada, in a country that is predominantly monogamous / serial monogamous, which still has a lot of Puritan roots and some like Judeo-Christian values kind of permeating the society. So we're leaning away from it more and more. Certainly my parents' generation and for sure my grandparents' generation was much more everyone's monogamous, and that's kind of the goal. We're kind of breaking away from it now, and it's really interesting to think about the implications of that with the violence, and then also seeing the rise in like the incel community and the sexually frustrated young men that aren't able to seem to connect with women, and then combine that with the rise of online dating where you're able to like just have a plethora of potential mates and there's always the next one potential, as well as our like inability, our confirmation bias, and we can't, we don't have a good idea of the statistics of like the person that we want, how many of those people there actually are. So sorry, there's the dog again. So we're living in this really interesting time where the ideas from here, you can kind of see them playing out. They also touch on what has happened with birth control and how that kind of changes the potential strategies for women and what the implications of that are. Because what birth control does is it reduces the risk of pregnancy, obviously, but for women, now they have more options in how they want to behave sexually because there isn't that danger component of getting pregnant, where now their health is at risk. It's a long-term investment and then lifelong investment once the child is born. And so it sort of shifts and changes. And it's just really interesting to look at what's happening globally from this perspective that they're talking about in this chapter. So that was what I wanted to say about parenthood and relationships this chapter. They also talk about love across species, like does your dog love you, etc. What happens with grief and things like that. And then as always, they give you some tips. They call it the corrective lens. So what can you do in your life to make sure that you're kind of balancing your ancestral evolutionary programming and dealing with like the current world that is very novel and crazy. And one of them that hit me quite hard was they recommend breastfeeding your infant, which is my confirmation bias 100%. I very much believe in why we should be breastfeeding. We are mammals and there's a lot more than nutrition with breastfeeding. And so they they talk about it. Adults who breastfeed have better formed palates and better aligned teeth compared to those who are bottle fed. So, what that means is when you are nursing from your mom, you're exercising your tongue and your mouth muscles. And that exercise is helping to shape your palate, meaning you have enough space for your teeth. Okay, that's what they're talking about. And breast milk has in it all manner of nutrients and information that we do not understand. And so, what's really cool about that is the nutritional needs of the baby are passed to the mom through the saliva. So the 70% of the breast milk that that like a infant is gonna drink is made during the feeding. So the mom's body is like getting the order custom for the baby. And that goes with immunity as well. So when the baby is sick, the mom is producing the antibodies needed to help the baby through the illness. Plus, there's the hormonal oxytocin stimulation that is also happening. It may, for instance, and then here's, oh yeah, I didn't even talk about this one, contain cues with which the infant entrains his sleep-wake cycle. So what this means, so if you are, let's say you're not nursing, but you're pumping, so you're still using breast milk, and you pump 24 hours so that you can maintain your cycle. If you give the baby the milk that you pumped at night, it's gonna be different than the milk during the day, and it's gonna disrupt the sleep cycle because of the cortisol levels, right? So we release cortisol at like, I don't know, 4 a.m. or something to help kickstart our wake cycle. And we release melatonin 2 hours or something before we go to bed to kickstart our sleep cycle. And that transfers through the breast milk and it's going to influence the baby's sleep. This is craziness. So cool. They talk about that. Thus, if you do breastfeed and also pump milk to feed the baby at other times, feeding your baby milk that was pumped at the same time of day is, as it is currently, could be helpful in getting your baby to sleep when you want him to. Then they say, put it another way, beware Chesterton's breast milk. AKA, they didn't say it explicitly, but how I'm interpreting that is beware formula and the companies that tell you that formula is just as good as breast milk and you're meeting the nutritional components of your baby. You are. Formula will give your baby the nutrition they need, but that's it. So your baby will survive, but your baby will have a harder time thriving. So that was, I'm glad they touched on that because that is what my reading and all the books that I've read and all the lactation consultants I've talked to, like that's what my belief is as well. And so I was pumped that these evolutionary biologists also agree. So next chapter is childhood. And I'm right in the thick of it, just toddlerhood. So I'm excited to see what they say. And I have some plans, and maybe I'll modify my plans depending on what I learn in this book. Okay, that's all I have for you today. Have a magical day, and take care.